Welcome to table for 92. Element number 74, tungsten. It's number 74 because it has exactly 74 protons within its nucleus. So first thing, this is a ham from Costco. It is from Spain, but it is admittedly from Costco. This whole kit comes with it, including the knife. They do not sharpen this knife at all. I mean, I sharpened this thing for like an hour last night to even get a nice cut on it. But one thing that they never show you in like cooking shows and stuff, when you're done sharpening a knife, wipe it down because you are taking off fine particles of metal by doing that. Okay, for tungsten, we're cooking, well, not cooking, but we're gonna cut up this Iberico ham and celebrate the Spanish discovery of tungsten. Oh boy, yeah, I've been waiting 3 years to eat this thing. My sister gave it to me for my birthday 3 years ago. I was, of course, very appreciative, but it was during like the dark days of COVID, and it's like a 14-pound ham, and I was like, I can't eat this all at once, and like after you take it out of the plastic, you know, you have to eat it all in one go, basically. So here we go. It's 3 years old, but it smells good to me, so I'm gonna cut into it, and we'll see if it's edible. This is so good, like I don't even want to talk about tungsten or anything. I just want to make a blanket out of this and take a nap. It's so delicious, it's unbelievable. Okay, so this isn't from the Basque region where the brothers El Huyar discovered tungsten. The Basque region, by the way, is not culturally or geographically part of Spain. They have their own language, their own customs, and the Basque country extends into parts of France. So, I'm gonna make a beautiful charcuterie dish, but yeah, it's gonna be like the best Lunchable I've ever had. But yeah, here we go, tungsten. Actually, this is the only element, tungsten, that was actually discovered in Spain, and boy is it an important one. Tungsten is used in so much stuff. Like, it's basically vibranium, right? Like, honestly, if you were going to take any metal from the periodic table to be based on vibranium, it's tungsten. I mean, it didn't come to Earth, you know, from an asteroid strike that hit Central Africa 10,000 years ago, like in the movies, but tungsten kind of seems otherworldly sometimes. On the periodic table, any element heavier than iron that has a higher atomic number than iron was not created by nuclear fission, but by supernovas, as in a massive star exploded and thrust out incredible energy and neutrons that created new elements. So tungsten is vibranium, I guess. And yeah, it's extremely rare on Earth. It's about 1.5 parts per million in Earth's crust. So yeah, every million pounds of Earth, you get about 1.5 pounds of tungsten. That's gonna be about the 56th most abundant element on the periodic table. So about halfway. Tungsten has the highest melting temperature of any metal on the periodic table and the lowest vapor pressure of any metal. And it is still the strongest metal known when heated to high temperatures. So yeah, it's an incredible metal. Oh, and basically all acids don't do anything to tungsten. So tungsten is used in a lot of things today. Some good, some meh, some real bad. Tungsten, first off, is one of a handful of elements where the abbreviation on the periodic table doesn't match its name, right? Usually that's because their Latin or German, you know, name is being used, i.e. gold is AU for the Latin word for gold, aurum. Tungsten is a little different. In the centuries before the Basque brothers discovered tungsten, you know, like for science, it was already kind of known by like smelters and metallurgists around the world. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. It's happened with other metals too. Before we really had the modern idea of elements as in forms of matter that cannot be broken down into any more substances, these miners and like metallurgists in the 15 and 1600s were noticing like something weird was going on, which, you know, they later found out that was tungsten. But people were working back then under the ancient Greek idea that there's really only 4 elements that make up the universe: earth, wind, water, and fire. So like metals, different kinds of metals like gold and silver, those all would be classified as earth elements. So miners in like what's modern day Sweden and Germany would be mining out silver and would encounter this weird substance that a 16th century professor explained, quote, "It robs the tin in the fire, making it brittle and patchy." This would later turn out to be tungsten, based on minerals mixed in with the silver ore and tin ores. The Swedes called it tungsten, meaning heavy stone, while the Germans called it wolfram, meaning wolf's froth or wolf's foam. They actually called it wolfschar too, meaning wolf's hair. So apparently somebody back in the day had some very close encounter with a wolf, and this mineral that they were mining out reminded them of that wolf. It could even be that because of the way wolfram or tungsten, depending on the preferred name, that because when it was mixed with tin, it made it really difficult to separate and often ruined the tin. So it's thought like maybe it reminded these metallurgists of a wolf devouring its prey. You know, who knows? We really can't say where these names come from, but you know, better name than what the Swedes gave it, just heavy rock. I mean, like wolf's hair, that's a pretty sweet name. So yeah, over like the next couple hundred years, from the 1500s to the 1700s, right when chemists were starting to figure out what chemical elements really were, a lot of different people investigated and tried to isolate tungsten, or wolfram, from its source minerals. It would be discovered in the Basque Country by two brothers, the brothers El Huyar. Other people had come close to figuring it out though. Actually, the elder of the brothers El Huyar had worked with a couple of chemists that had almost figured it out, but the brothers El Huyar published the first really thorough explanation on how to take the different minerals containing tungsten or wolfram and extract more or less a pure metal out of it. And remember, in science, it's the ones that publish first that are credited with the discovery in the long run. So whether or not, you know, they're technically the first people to find it, it's who publicized it first. Speaking of publicizing, you would think the naming of something as important as a chemical element would be pretty straightforward, right? But for a lot of elements, they're named so they sound like catchy. It's not just boring science. It's like minerals being discovered today, right? Take for instance, tanzanite, beautiful gemstone. It's only discovered in the 1960s in Mount Kilimanjaro. And when Tiffany and Company was trying to sell it at first, the original name for it was blue zoisite, based on like the minerals that were found inside of it. Well, zoisite sounds way too much like suicide. They can't brand that. They can't market that. So they changed the name of the mineral to tanzanite. You know, sounds a little sexier. It's the same thing that happened with tungsten. I mean, wolfram. So the brothers discovered tungsten in the mineral wolframite in 1783. When they announced the discovery to the world, they decided it should be derived from wolfram. And they came up with the name wolfranicum, which I honestly think it sounds pretty dope. But the brothers, just because they discovered the element and published it first, it didn't really mean that the rest of the scientific community didn't get a say in the naming of things. Jöns Jacob Berzelius, arguably the most important chemist of his generation, actually said, like in writing, quote, "Wolfranicum is without a doubt a bad name." I disagree. I think it's a cool name, but you know, he's like a super famous chemist. But yeah, he didn't like tungsten either because he thought that the name just meaning heavy stone, it didn't really like catch on as much. French chemists preferred tungsten. The English followed them. It ended up like in the French and English speaking worlds as tungsten, but in the German speaking world, they could still call it wolfram, just like today. So it was abbreviated W on the periodic table, but called tungsten by most people. And actually the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry still uses wolfram today. So it's been like 250 years since it was discovered, and we still don't have an agreement on what this thing is called. Wolfram, wolfranicum, tungsten. Yeah, I use tungsten. On to what tungsten is actually used for. First off, about 80% of tungsten worldwide is mined in China, and they have about 2/3 supply of the entire world supply. So even though tungsten isn't a rare earth element, China controls most of the world supply, just like the rare earth elements. Tungsten doesn't react with oxygen. That's a big thing, except at really high temperatures. So in that way, it is superior to iron or copper. It doesn't rust. It doesn't interact with acids very much, except for like really concentrated acids. It does get attacked by fluorine, which makes sense. Fluorine is the most reactive of all elements. Like I say, fluorine likes to get around. No judgment, of course. But yeah, even with tungsten and fluorine, that can only really be done at like crazy low temperatures. And the real kicker is that the tungsten melting temperature is insane. It's 3,422 degrees Celsius or 6,191.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost unbelievable. Like if you melted tungsten and poured it into molten lava, the tungsten would freeze the lava because the lava is so much cooler in comparison. So there's a little bit of this history that always fascinates me. Like so many of the elements that are crucial to society today were not immediately found to have uses when they were first discovered. Like tungsten was first discovered in 1783, right, in the Basque Country, but it wasn't really used until electronics came around. That's where tungsten really became mass manufactured. Like, yeah, there were some interesting things like tungsten salts that were used to dye garments, and they were actually fireproof. That was used in like the 1850s, but it was really when like the modern processes of extracting tungsten steel was created. That's when it really took off. That happened in Austria in the like late 1800s, early 1900s. It's called the Bessemer process. This invention of making tungsten steel would have disastrous repercussions on everyone all around the world. Not the invention by itself, I guess. It's just like the time and place where that was figured out. I mean, it's just human nature. You know, we find something cool and we immediately are like, how can we kill people with this? So tungsten, you can create the strongest bridges if you wanted. You could do the strongest railroads, right? You could build that with tungsten steel, or you could make giant guns that can kill people from miles away. Guess which one they chose to do? People had big guns before tungsten steel, that's true, but the tools that the tungsten steel could produce made the guns in World War I way better than anything they had before and way deadlier. Like, this is a story of World War I, perhaps the most influential conflict of all time. I mean, we're still dealing with the aftermath of World War I even today. The big deal with the tungsten steel, though, is that that the German army had realized how important tungsten steel would be if war ever broke out, and so they started stockpiling it. Ironically, these German business firms actually bought tungsten mines in Great Britain, produced the tungsten, and shipped it back to Germany to make tungsten steel, which helped them make a lot of the weapons that they would eventually use to maim and kill millions of British, French, American soldiers. It's yet another example of scientists creating something incredible and it being immediately taken for military applications. Kind of reminds me of like Oppenheimer, you know, the movie. Like as soon as they create the atomic bomb, it's like the army just like packs it into a bus and they're like, thanks, bye. Taken away from the scientists, and now the scientists have no say in how it gets to be used. Of course, tungsten is used in a lot of other stuff today, heavy industry. Tungsten's still used to make horrifying weapons of war. It's just human nature, I guess. But, you know, at least it was invented by the brothers El Huyar, so I could finally eat this Serrano ham. It is so good. It is unbelievable. Well, I just want to apologize to anybody from Spain watching this for my, I'm sure, very amateurish carving style, but doesn't matter. This stuff is amazing. That was Tungsten, and I finally got to eat this Spanish ham. 4 years in the making. Thanks. See you next time. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button, because just please do it, just for me.